Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes. To keep in touch with us, use our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, which are all at Q and Review. That's CUEANDREVIEW. Or get in touch via information@qandreview.com. That's information@CUEANDREVIEW.com. Please like and share our podcasts and give us any constructive feedback.
This article is from The National, date 10th June 2022, from the News section. SNP MSP calls for more minority ethnic staff in Scottish schools. By Jane MacLeod. SNP MSP Cal Cub Stewart has called on local authorities to increase the representation of minority ethnic staff in Scottish schools. In Holyrood yesterday, the MSP raised the disproportionate lack of minority ethnic teachers in Scotland's schools, noted in the Diversity in the Teaching Profession Scotland Annual Data Report. The SNP MSP said that councils, as employers, should be actively exploring positive action measures to address the underrepresentation of black and minority ethnic staff at all levels, particularly senior. Cabinet Secretary Shirley Ann Somerville praised Glasgow City Council plans supporting 5 acting principal teacher roles for minority ethnic teachers, which could be rolled out across Scotland. Stewart said, "Better representation of minority ethnic teachers at all levels in our schools is a goal we should all be fighting for. It means we can provide our young people with a more diverse education experience, one more reflective of the society around them, as well as offering positive role models for minority ethnic students. The underrepresentation of minority ethnic teachers in our schools should be a cause for concern for all of us, because minority ethnic people and our young people deserve better. For many years, we have heard a lot of warm words, which I do not doubt the sincerity of, but it's time for those words to turn into action. I'm very glad the SNP Scottish Government is committed to supporting the recommendations of the Teaching in a Diverse Scotland report of 2021, but we now need local authorities as employers to step up and play their part." That article was by Jane MacLeod. This article is from The National, date 13th June 2022, from the Culture section. Channel 4 ain't broke. Armando Iannucci joins anti-privatisation campaign. By Jane MacLeod. A campaign to stop the privatisation of Channel 4 is being launched with support from celebrities and production companies. Derry Girls star Siobhan McSweeney and Scottish writer, director, producer Armando Iannucci, creator of The Thick of It, are among those backing the Channel 4 Ain't Broke campaign. It brings together 27 production businesses from across the country, alongside supporters like the team behind the new comedy Big Boys, including writer Jack Rooke and actor John Poynting, as well as the Archbishop of York, Bishop of Ripon and Bishop of Leeds. The campaign points to evidence which shows the channels is in a very good financial health and is helping to deliver on the government's levelling up agenda. Channel 4 Ain't Broke highlights that a publicly owned broadcaster funded through advertising, Channel 4 does not cost the taxpayer a penny, instead returning a profit of £74 million last year and contributing £1 billion to the economy. McSweeney said, "Channel 4 is a huge success story and Derry Girls wouldn't have happened without it. It's something to be proud of, not something to destroy." Right now, Channel 4 is boosting the economy and throwing open the door for a new generation of writers, performers, producers and creative thinkers across the country. It ain't broke, so don't fix it. Mark Williams from Finn Studios said, Channel 4 is the levelling up broadcaster. It supports tons of small businesses like ours all around the country. It gives people a way to get a foot in the door into the industry, whatever their background. It's time to drop this crazy plan to sell it off. The initiative is being coordinated by campaign group We Own It. That article was by Jane MacLeod. This article is from The National, date 13th June 2022, from the Politics section. SNP's Jenny Gilruth marries former Labour leader Kezia Dugdale, by Steph Brown. SNP Minister Jenny Gilruth has married former Scottish Labour leader Kezia Dugdale. The couple, who announced in July 2017 they had been dating for a few months, tied the knot at a ceremony in Fife in front of friends and family. Among guests at the event were Rural Affairs Secretary Mary Goodgeon, former SNP Constitution Secretary Michael Russell, and ex-Scottish Labour leader Ian Gray. The pair told the Courier, "This was a wonderfully happy day for us, and we were blessed to share it with family and friends. Thank you to everyone who made our day so special." The ceremony was held in the walled garden at Tees's estate, Ceres. Back in 2017, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon wished Gilruth and Dugdale every happiness after they revealed they were together, tweeting, "So love really does conquer all." Sturgeon also tweeted her congratulations to the couple after they got hitched, saying, "Many congratulations to Jenny and Kez." Dugdale resigned from her post as Scottish Labour leader in August 2017. She quit Holyrood altogether in 2019 to become director of the John Smith Centre for Public Service based at the University of Glasgow. Gilruth worked as a teacher in Edinburgh and Dunfermline before being elected as SNP MSP for Mid-Fife and Glenrothes in 2016. She was named Transport Minister in January, having previously served as Minister for Culture, Europe and International Development since 2020. Several MSPs, including Christina McKelvey, Natalie Dawn and Rona Mackay, sent their congratulations to the happy couple. That article was by Steph Brown. This article is from The National, date 13th June 2022, from the News section. UK economy shrinks in April amid fears of severe recession, by Angus Cochrane. The UK has plunged further towards financial crisis after it was revealed the economy contracted for the second month in a row in April. The Office for National Statistics, ONS, said gross domestic product, or GDP, a measure of the size of the economy, fell by 0.3% in April, with all three main sectors suffering a fall in output for the first time since January 2021. April's month-on-month drop in GDP was also the biggest contraction since January 2021 and follows a fall of 0.1% in March. Experts had been expecting growth of 0.1% in April. The ONS said it marked the first time GDP has fallen for 2 months in a row since March and April 2020, when the pandemic first hit and sent the economy tumbling. It comes after the OECD forecast the UK will record 0% economic growth next year, worse than any other G20 nation except heavily sanctioned Russia. The ONS figures showed output contracted by 0.3% in the main services sector, largely due to the ending of the government's COVID-19 test and trace programme and lower vaccination activity. With the test and trace and vaccines impact stripped out, GDP would have risen by 0.1% in April, the ONS said, while it added that in the 3 months to April, GDP grew by 0.2%. But there were also declines in the manufacturing and construction sectors, down 1% and 0.4% respectively in April, with manufacturers in particular noting the impact of soaring prices and supply chain woes. The ONS said it is seeing anecdotal evidence widely across the economy of firms being hit by record fuel and energy prices, in particular the manufacturing sector. Chancellor Rishi Sunak said, "Countries around the world are seeing slowing growth, and the UK is not immune from these challenges. I want to reassure people we are fully focused on growing the economy to address the cost of living in the longer term, while supporting families and businesses with the immediate pressures they are facing." He recently announced a further £21 billion support package for households to help tackle the mounting cost of living crisis, including a £400 discount on gas and electricity bills for every home, with measures part funded by a windfall tax on energy firm profits. But the Chancellor has been told more action will be needed, with inflation already running at 9% in the UK and expected to soar past 10% in the autumn as prices rise steadily higher. Petrol costs have hit new records, with the average cost of filling a typical family car with petrol rising past £100 for the first time last week. The Bank of England is expected to raise interest rates for the fifth time in a row on Thursday, from 1% to 1.25%, to try and rein in rampant inflation. Samuel Toombs of Parthenon Macroeconomics is forecasting the economy to contract overall between April and June as the cost of living crisis hits hard, but still believes the UK will dodge a full-blown recession. He said, "A recession, 2 quarters of negative growth, remains unlikely. Households' real disposable incomes should rise in both the third and fourth quarters, now that the Chancellor has announced an extra £15 billion in grants during these quarters, equal to nearly 2% of their likely income." That article was by Angus Cochrane.
From the National, Monday the 13th of June 2022, from the comment section, a look at 5 myths that bedevil the life of people in Scotland, by John Drummond. Article originally published on the 12th of June. Throughout history, human societies have welcomed myths to help them understand the world around them. Stories have always been important to people. In a world of threats, it is reassuring to believe tales that our rulers are gifted, and in the end all will be well. This week, we look at 5 myths that bedevil life for people in Scotland. Myth 1. The Tories can be trusted to manage public money better than anyone else. This is a long-standing tale, based on the square root of very little. Let's look at the facts, rather than the fiction. Last week we learned that the UK Chancellor, part of a family of billionaires according to some accounts, lost £11 billion. In short, a man who seems to manage his own money exceptionally well chucked away a truly staggering amount of yours. His incompetence in financial affairs cost us truly enormous amount. He has cost the government £11 billion by failing to manage government interest rates properly. Many people do not fully understand the difference between a million and a billion. £1 million, 1 followed by 6 zeros. By contrast, £1 billion, 1 followed by 9 zeros. To put this in context, this amount is many million times the figure of the so-called deficit that an independent Scotland might experience. Of course, to be fair to the Chancellor, he is not the only one in the UK government who is lousy with public finances. Even more mind-blowing amounts have been lost on COVID contracts that were given to friends of ministers, only for the resultant products to be destroyed because these don't work. Myth 2. BBC News is impartial. For years, we in Scotland have suffered from a calamitous drop in standards of public broadcasting. Old stagers at the BBC are dismayed by what passes for news at Pacific Quay. Now, this malaise has spread across the network. Many were astounded when the broadcaster edited out the chorus of boos that greeted Boris Johnson as he entered St Paul's to celebrate the Jubilee. In this respect, the BBC is one of the very few cases of a fish rotting from the tail upwards. Of course, many are still waiting for the BBC to acknowledge the truly frightening costs of Brexit. Myth 3. The pound in your pocket is safe and sound. I have news for you. It's largely irrelevant. Money is another myth and exists purely in people's shared imagination. Money is not coins and banknotes. Money is anything people are willing to use in order to represent symbolically the value of other things for the purpose of exchanging goods and services. In reality, coins and banknotes are a rare form of money. The sum of total of money in the world is around $60 trillion, but the sum total of banknotes is about $6 trillion. More than 90% of all money exists only in computer servers. In other words, money isn't a material reality, it is a psychological construct, according to the author Yuval Noah Harari. It works by converting matter into mind. Do keep this in mind when economists and others warble on about the challenges facing an independent Scotland. If we have worthwhile goods and services in this country, others will find a way of paying for them. Myth 4. The Union, with its broad shoulders, is good for you. It really isn't, and it gets worse daily. In reality, it is well past its prime and heading rapidly to senescence. Its constitution is largely non-existent and provides little protection against an executive that ruthlessly and continually exploits its bottomless flaws. Its institutions are decrepit. It is deeply wedded to its past at a time when competitor states are forward-looking. The Jubilee celebrations were deeply embarrassing to anyone looking on from abroad. It has a deep-seated desire to shrink in itself in a way that suggests a crisis of confidence and a helplessness in facing the world. These failings have profound consequences for the average person. Food prices are soaring, and it now costs over £100 to fill the family car. In many respects, the Union is an illusion. It really only exists while Scots believe it does. Once that changes, freedom follows. Myth 5. Scotland needs permission to become free. No, it doesn't. However, Scotland does need to be recognised by others as independent. Scots are sovereign. Parliaments across this island accept this claim. But this is not enough. A workable independence needs widespread cooperation and agreement of its terms. The world needs to recognise the claim, not just that Scots and their neighbours. Singer Iona Fife is a star guest on the TNT show this week. Join us at 7pm on Wednesday on Indie Live. And that piece was by John Drummond. From the National, Monday the 13th of June 2022. From the comments section, headlines on soaring mental illness among police were irresponsible, by Alan Dorrans MP. Last week, one Scottish newspaper ran the headline, Morale amongst Police Scotland rank and file at rock bottom amid soaring mental health absences. Police Professional, the usually more accurate UK law enforcement journal, used the same mental health label for absences actually recorded by Police Scotland as due to psychological disorder and stress-related absence. Notably, but not mentioned in the media reports, the 22% increase over the past 5 years conceals the fact that, based on Police Scotland's published figures, such absences had actually fallen by 15% between 2019-20 and 2020-21. Year-on-year fluctuation is to be expected, and simply adding up the data over enough years to get a big headline number is simply poor journalism. However, as I suggest above, there is more serious misrepresentation of reality in crudely conflating stress and mental health illness. First, we do not know what percentage of the absences are due to formally diagnosed mental health illness. While I am by no means underestimating the cost of stress and recognise that unrelieving high stress levels can do more serious mental health illness, they are not the same thing. Let me quote the mental health charity Mind. Stress is not normally considered a mental health problem, but it is connected to our mental health in several ways. As a former police officer, I understand the presence of stress in the job and the damaging effects it can have. Steps must be taken to deal with it, but to present the information in a way that suggests mental health illnesses are soaring among UK police officers is to irresponsibly increase anxiety among their colleagues and the wider public who depend upon them. Alan Dorrans, who wrote this article, is the SNP MP for Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock, and a former detective inspector with the Metropolitan Police. From the National, Tuesday the 14th of June 2022, from the news section, a new campaign for blood donations has been launched by Jean McLeod. A major push for more blood donors has been made in a new campaign, with hospitals reportedly seeing an increase in demand. The Scottish National Blood Transfusion Service, SNBTS, is hoping to encourage some 16,000 new blood donors in the next 12 months to bring levels up to a more secure position. The donor base reached record low levels during the COVID-19 pandemic, the organisation confirmed. Speaking on World Blood Donor Day, which takes place on June the 14th each year, Debbie McNaughton, SNBTS's Associate Director, said that since lockdowns have ended, demand for blood in hospitals has risen by 7%. The new campaign features blood donors from across Scotland. McNaughton said, "We currently have 96,295 blood donors, and we need to build this to 105,000 active donors, so we're asking people to register." Virginia, 17, from Springburn Academy in Glasgow, features in the campaign. She said, "I believe everyone who can donate blood should do so. It is such a rewarding feeling, knowing you have made an impact on someone's life. At first I was a bit worried, but the staff are amazing and the process is pain-free. I will definitely go back and donate more blood once my 3 months are up." McNaughton added, "It's never been easier to register as a blood donor. You can book your appointment online and 84% of active donors now have an online account. Open yours at scotsblood.co.uk and help us keep NHS Scotland running." World Blood Donor Day was created to raise awareness of the need for safe blood and blood products for transfusion. And that was an article by Jane McLeod. From the National, Tuesday the 14th of June 2022, from the news section, Mum of man who fell from balcony at the Harry Styles Glasgow gig says it's a miracle he survived, by Nicole Mitchell, multimedia journalist. The mum of a man who fell from a stand at Ibrox during a Harry Styles gig on Saturday says it's a miracle he survived. Dylan Mood was rushed to hospital and put on life support after plummeting from the club deck of the stadium into the stand below towards the end of the show. The 20-year-old from East Kilbride escaped a horror plunge with just 2 black eyes, bruising and concussion after losing his balance and falling over a barrier onto seats, the Daily Record reports. The electrical engineer, who had been enjoying a work night out in a VIP box, was rushed to Queen Elizabeth University Hospital and taken to the high dependency unit after being knocked unconscious. Dylan's mum, Marion Hawkins, told the Daily Record, "We didn't know what injuries he had, so he was put on a ventilator to keep him stable. It was touch and go that night, but the scans came back all clear and he has no broken bones. It's a complete miracle he's still here, walking away with just cuts and scrapes." She continued, "Dylan was crying on me to the phone today. I think it's just hitting home for him how serious it was and how close he got to not being here. I'm just glad he never landed on anyone. He could have killed someone. His boss and workmates have been checking in on him. Everyone got a huge fright." Marion told the Daily Record that Dylan can't exactly remember what happened, as it all happened so fast. She said, "Dylan told me he was leaning up against the banister in the VIP box and remembered thinking it was quite low down. He can't remember exactly, it's a bit of a blur, but he thinks he went to lean against it, misjudged it and fell back. It all just happened so quickly. He was knocked out and remembers coming to and getting a fright as people were grabbing at him. Paramedics were called and they got him out of there and worked on him in the ambulance before taking him to hospital. I just panicked when I got the call and drove straight there. But he's doing good now and I hope to get him home today. I need him home." A Police Scotland spokesperson said, "Officers were made aware of a man falling from a club deck at the premises on Edmondson Drive, Glasgow, at around 10:15 p.m. on Saturday, June 11th, 2022. There were no suspicious circumstances, and the man was seen to by medical staff. And that article was by Nicole Mitchell from The National, Tuesday the 14th of June 2022. From the Politics section, Scottish Independence, Nicola Sturgeon's government publishes Scene Setter by Xander Richards, political reporter. The Scottish Government has published its opening documents in support of independence. The 72-page book was published on the government's website on Tuesday morning as First Minister Nicola Sturgeon prepared to speak at its official launch at Bute House. Scottish Green co-leader and active Travel Minister Patrick Harvey joined the SNP leader at the launch. Titled Independence in the Modern World, Wealthier, Happier, Fairer, Why Not Scotland? The document seeks to define the UK model and explain its enduring structural problems. The paper, which is meant to act as a scene setter for independence, is the first of a series of documents due to be published before the final day of the Holyrood session on July the 1st. The Building a New Scotland series will form the perspectives for an independent Scotland, addressing the huge potential an independent Scotland will have and challenges that will be faced after a yes vote. The First Minister said that future papers, which are already in development, would address issues such as international trade and currency. In the Why Not Scotland paper published on Tuesday, examples are drawn from 10 countries of a similar size to Scotland and looking to what could happen after an independence vote. It said that these comparator countries, Ireland, Switzerland, Norway, Denmark, Netherlands, Iceland, Sweden, Austria, Belgium and Finland, are all wealthier than the UK. Sturgeon said, why are neighbouring independent countries of Scotland's size wealthier, happier and fairer than the UK? What do they, and indeed other countries in North East Europe, regardless of size, frequently outperform the UK across a range of key measures that determines well-being? And, fundamentally, if these countries can be successful, why not an independent Scotland, given the abundance of talent, resources and natural advantages we possess? The First Minister added that the documents presented key evidence to support the informed, inclusive debate that people in Scotland deserve. Published alongside the Why Not Scotland paper was an easy-read version of the core arguments in the document. This summarises the same arguments, stating that the comparator countries which Scotland could follow in independence are wealthier, happier and fairer than the UK. It warns that independence would not change Scotland overnight, but argues that Scots could build such a country with the full powers a yes vote would bring. This easy-read paper has also been published in a variety of languages, including Gaelic, Spanish, Ukrainian, Arabic, Mandarin, Polish and Hindi. And that report is by Xander Richards, political reporter.
The National News on Wednesday the 15th of June. Russia bans entry to 28 UK journalists. An article written by Laura Webster, News and Features editor. Russia has sanctioned 28 UK journalists, including the BBC Director General Tim Davie, who they claim are involved in spreading false and one-sided information about the war in Ukraine. According to Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, those banned from entering the country include the Times editor John Witherow, The Guardian's editor-in-chief Catherine Viner, and BBC journalists Nick Robinson, Ola Guerin and Clive Myrie, Stuart Ramsey of Sky News, The Guardian's Sean Walker, and TV presenters Sophie Ridge and Cathy Newman are also on the list. Russia said the journalists named had contributed towards fueling Russophobia in British society. It claimed other figures on the list who are connected to the UK defence industry had been involved in making decisions on the supply of weapons to Ukraine, which are used by local punishers and Nazi formations to kill civilians. The news came after Foreign Secretary Liz Truss assured she will do whatever is necessary to secure the release of 2 Britons sentenced to death for fighting Russian forces in Ukraine. She told the families of Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner the UK government is working flat out to secure their release after a sham trial by a pro-Moscow proxy. The Russians were holding the 2 men while claiming they are foreign mercenaries. But Britain and their families argue they were legitimate members of the Ukrainian army, so should be treated as prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. The two men have lived in Ukraine since before the invasion. The official Foreign Office advice for Britons was also warning against all travel to Ukraine. An article written by Laura Webster. The National Politics on Wednesday the 15th of June. BBC criticised for appalling coverage of Nicola Sturgeon Independence paper launch. An exclusive article written by Xander Richards, political reporter. The BBC has faced questions after its coverage of the Scottish Government's launch of a scene setter for independence was branded appalling. Its dedicated BBC Scotland channel only showed placeholder content, including a news ticker which failed to mention the document's publication. Instead, the ticker carried headlines about a major tampon maker pledging to address shortages in the US, pop star Lizzo changing a derogatory lyric in her music, and Instagram launching new parental controls in the UK. What is the point of BBC Scotland if they're unwilling to broadcast a live press conference about the key political issue of the day? ALBA General Secretary Chris McElhenney asked on Twitter. The news of the launch was also not covered on BBC One, which instead showed an episode of Rip Off Britain, followed by Homes Under the Hammer. MP Carol Monaghan posted, "The First Minister sets out a plan for independence," and BBC One is showing Homes Under the Hammer. The broadcaster did show Nicola Sturgeon's speech on both its BBC Two and BBC News channels. Although the beginning was missed, Ms Sturgeon was speaking live on the channel for around 15 minutes before Green Minister Patrick Harvie took over. While Mr Harvie was speaking, the BBC broadcasts both cut away to their news team, sparking further criticism. Mr McElhenney told The National the BBC coverage of today's key announcement on the promised referendum in 2023 was nothing short of appalling. Hundreds of thousands of viewers, including those most vulnerable to digital exclusion that tuned in to watch, would have experienced the BBC cutting the feed less than halfway into the press conference. Is there a particular reason that BBC Scotland didn't think viewers such as old age pensioners should not have been offered all the available facts from the press conference? The BBC must answer to why they did not show the event in full, as this is hardly going to win back the trust of independent supporters as we move forward towards next year's referendum. The BBC was approached for comment. An exclusive article written by Xander Richards. The National Politics on Wednesday the 15th of June. New poll reveals Tory members' election fears. An article written by Judith Duffy. Less than half of Tory members believe their party will secure victory in the next general election, with grassroots confidence at its lowest level this Parliament, a new poll has found. The survey by the influential Conservative Home website found expectations of the Tories leading the government at Westminster in some form had fallen from a high of 72% this year to 49.5% in May, before Boris Johnson faced a no-confidence vote. Just 35% now believe the Conservatives will win an overall majority, with around 9% expecting a Tory minority government and around 5% predicting their party will lead a coalition. When the poll of a panel of party members was carried out in April, 45% expected a majority, 12% a minority government, and around 3.5% a Tory-led coalition. William Atkinson, assistant editor of Conservative Home, said the drop in expectations for a majority is likely to have several causes. He wrote, "Partygate, the poor local election results, and the continuing Tory lag in the polls provide a poor platform for a summer likely to be dominated by stories of stagflation and strikes. The Ukraine bounce of March has also worn off." He also compared Boris Johnson's premiership to that of Edward Heath in the 1970s. Tory Prime Minister Heath called a general election in February 1974, posing the question, who governs Britain, the unions, in an attempt to boost his party, and resolved to remain as party leader after it resulted in a hung parliament. He was replaced by Harold Wilson and a minority Labour government. Mr Atkinson added, "Our panel's pessimism, coupled with Number 10's repeated threats of a sudden election, suggests Mr Johnson might also mirror Mr Heath in his performance at the ballot box. Who governs Britain, indeed?" An article written by Judith Duffy. The National News on Wednesday the 15th of June. Rail strikes to bring key Scottish lines to a standstill. An article written by Hamish Morrison, political reporter. Half of Britain's rail lines will be closed during next week's strikes, Network Rail has said. There will be no trains running north of Falkirk next week from Glasgow or Edinburgh. Lines to and between Aberdeen, Dundee, Inverness, Kyle of Lachalsh, Perth, Oban and Wick, among others, will be entirely closed on strike days. Those travelling south will face an easier time, with the West Coast Main Line still open between London and Glasgow via Birmingham and Manchester. Routes between Edinburgh and London via Newcastle also remain in service. Network Rail said no passenger services will serve key staycation locations such as Penzance in Cornwall, Bournemouth in Dorset, Swansea in South Wales, Holyhead in North Wales, Chester in Cheshire and Blackpool in Lancashire. The strike days are Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday next week. The number of passenger services on those days is expected to be limited to around 4,500 compared with 20,000 normally. Members of the Rail Maritime and Transport Union at Network Rail and 13 train operators are to strike for 3 days next week in similar disputes over pay, jobs and pensions. Lines will only be open between 7:30am and 6:30pm, meaning services will start later and finish earlier than usual. Passengers who must travel are urged to plan ahead to ensure they can complete their journeys within this window, Network Rail said. Last services from London to Scotland will leave in the early afternoon. Steve Montgomery, who chairs industry body, the Rail Delivery Group, said these strikes will affect the millions of people who use the train each day, including key workers, students with exams, those who cannot work from home, holidaymakers and those attending important business and leisure events. Working with Network Rail, our plan is to keep as many services running as possible, but significant disruption will be inevitable and some parts of the network will not have a service, so passengers should plan their journeys carefully and check their train times. Only around 12,000 to 14,000 services will be able to run on the days following the strikes. This is because signallers and control staff will not work overnight shifts that begin on the strike dates. This means trains will not be able to leave depots for several hours later than normal. An article written by Hamish Morrison. The National Politics on Wednesday the 15th of June. SNP MP Patrick Grady urged to quit after sexual misconduct breach. An article written by Gregor Young. An SNP MP who made an unwanted sexual advance to a teenage staffer should quit, the person he targeted has said. Patrick Grady is facing a 2-day suspension from the Commons after he was found to have breached Parliament's sexual misconduct policy. The man he targeted, who was 19 at the time, said he is bitterly disappointed at the lenient sanction. He also criticised the SNP's handling of the situation, saying he's been made to feel as though it's his fault, and said his life has been a living hell. Investigators examined the behaviour of Mr Grady, who was 36 at the time, towards the then 19-year-old party staff member at a 2016 SNP social event while under the influence of alcohol. A report into his conduct said that the Glasgow North MP made an unwanted sexual advance to the complainant that included the touching and stroking of the complainant's neck, hair and back. The recommendation that he should be suspended for 2 days came from the independent expert panel, which looks at cases of sexual misconduct. The victim, who's not being named to protect his identity, told the Daily Record, "I'm bitterly disappointed at such a lenient sanction. It's not only devastating to me, but also to other victims of sexual harassment. He needs to stand down as he's not fit to be an MP." The panel said the former Chief Whip's behaviour marked a significant breach of Parliament's sexual misconduct policy in a ruling on Tuesday. In a personal statement to the Commons, Mr Grady said, "I'm profoundly sorry for my behaviour and I deeply regret my actions and their consequences." The complainant, now aged 25, said that the SNP has made me feel like it's my fault and described the party's treatment of him as bullying. He told the newspaper, "Since making the complaint, it's been a living hell. I was punished by the party as a whole. Not any single individual, but I think as a collective I've been punished." In his statement to the Commons, Mr Grady accepted that on October the 20th, 2016, at an SNP social event, he made an inappropriate physical advance to a junior member of SNP group staff. He added, "My behaviour and the intent behind it was a significant breach of the Behaviour Code and Sexual Misconduct Policy for the UK Parliament. The breach is aggravated by a considerable disparity in age and authority between myself and the complainant, and further aggravated by the excessive consumption of alcohol on my part. I was wrong to make assumptions about the social and personal relationship that existed or had potential to exist between myself and the complainant, and wrong to act on those assumptions." Mr Grady stood aside as Chief Whip after the complaints were formally referred in May 2021. It's understood Mr Grady has been suspended from the SNP until his parliamentary suspension has been completed after the group met to consider the report on Tuesday evening. The SNP has been approached for comment on the newspaper article. An article written by Gregor Young.
Recorded from the National on the 15th of June 2022, from the Culture section. Recorded by Amy. Lorraine Kelly calls out Boris Johnson over TV interview refusal. By Jane MacLeod. Lorraine Kelly has called out Boris Johnson for his odd refusal to be interviewed on her show. The Scottish broadcaster issued the challenge to the Tory leader after he asked "Who's Lorraine?" when appearing on ITV last month. Johnson's question came during an interview in May on Good Morning Britain when Susanna Reid referenced ITV's Lorraine show, which airs after GMB. Kelly, 62, who has presented her popular daily talk show Lorraine since 2010, told the Daily Mirror, "I have met him a couple of times, but clearly I didn't make much of an impression. But absolutely he can come on my show whenever he likes. We have asked him, but he hasn't taken up our invitation so far. He's probably the first Prime Minister I've not interviewed. David Cameron came on a few times, and Theresa May, and the leaders of the opposition have many times. It's strange, it seems slightly odd, but he hid in a fridge when Piers Morgan tried to talk to him, so maybe he doesn't want to." The Good Morning Britain interview with Johnson at 10 Downing Street marked his first appearance on the ITV breakfast show since 2017 when he was Foreign Secretary. He had fleetingly featured on the show in December 2019 when he walked away from cameras and appeared to hide in an industrial fridge in order to avoid engaging in an interview. Following the "Who's Lorraine" remark, the Prime Minister's official spokesperson was quoted by The Guardian as saying that, as was clear, the Prime Minister was not fully across the ITV daytime lineup this morning, and also added, "You'll appreciate he has a number of issues to deal with on his desk." Last month, Kelly sent a special hello to the Prime Minister as she took to the stage at the BAFTA TV Awards to present the News Coverage Award, quipping, "Hello and a special hello to Boris. I'm Lorraine. It's lovely to see you." Scottish presenter Kelly ruled out a stint on popular shows like Strictly Come Dancing, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, or Dancing on Ice, telling the Daily Mirror, "I get asked all the time and it's kind people think of me, but I can't dance, I can't sing, and would rather eat my own bottom." Last year she was made a CPE for services to broadcasting journalism and charity. That article was by Jane MacLeod. Recorded by Amy. Recorded from the National on the 15th of June 2022, from the Culture section. Recorded by Amy. Refugee Festival Scotland. Ukrainian opera singer Oksana Mavrodi helps kick off events, by Emma Louise Riley. A Ukrainian opera singer who fled the Russian invasion has helped launch Scotland's Refugee Festival with a special performance during its opening event. Oksana Mavrodi performed alongside concert pianist and fellow Ukrainian Irana Melenchenko. Musicians kicked off the 10-day festival, which contains more than 100 events across Scotland. Mavrodi said, "I heard about Refugee Festival Scotland. I wanted to get involved. During hard times, it's important to stand up and use your voice. Being a musician, music is the best way for me to do that, and the festival is a really great platform. Being a refugee or asylum seeker can be perceived negatively, but we should not treat refugees as a burden. Just because someone is a refugee, it doesn't mean they don't have skills to bring. People are often highly skilled and highly educated, and they could make a really valuable contribution to society." Mavrodi and Melenchenko were joined by T2 actor Thierry Mabonga, who came to Scotland at the age of 8 after fleeing the war-torn Democratic Republic of Congo. He has been involved with the festival since 2020 when he performed in the piece Black Scots, based on his experience as a refugee. He said, "I'm really happy that Refugee Festival Scotland exists. It's very important that there is a space for people to share stories that might not otherwise get told. I really believe in the power of storytelling. There's more to a human being than trauma. We need to see the joys as well as the grief, and the conflicts and the challenges of someone's situation. I think that's what keeps us alive." The festival aims to showcase the food and drink, music and dance, language, and the art of the diverse refugee communities within Scotland. Each event will celebrate the lives and experiences of refugees through mediums such as art, theatre, film, food and music. For details of the festival's full programme, visit their website refugeefestivalscotland.co.uk. The article was by Emma Louise Riley.
The National, June 16. Indie Ref 2. BBC Scotland may be giving false idea of public opinion, SNP say. Report by Xander Richards. The SNP have called for transparency in the BBC's editorial decisions amid concerns that the broadcaster is presenting a skewed image of public opinion on Scottish independence. The concerns raised by the SNP centre around vox pops, clips which see various members of the public give their views on a certain topic. Although only a handful of people are generally shown during a vox pop segment, many more are usually interviewed, with only a select few making the final cut. This means that journalists can balance the representation in the segment to ensure that all views are given even airtime, or so that the views platformed are representative of the general public. However, the SNP have claimed that BBC Scotland may be presenting a false picture of Scottish public opinion through unrepresentative vox pops. The party has raised concerns around segments focusing on independence, which has been pushed back to the top of the news agenda after Nicola Sturgeon and Patrick Harvey launched the first in a series of papers arguing for independence. In one example, BBC Radio Scotland presented views from Dundee, Scotland's Yes City, which elected a majority SNP council at the local elections in May. However, a majority of the members of the public platformed by the BBC said that they did not support a second referendum or independence. Of the 4 people asked, only one supported the First Minister's independence push, with the others saying that now was not the right time. A second Vox Pop segment on BBC Radio Scotland asked people in Glasgow, another city which voted yes overall in 2014. However, of the 5 people platformed in Scotland's largest city, 3 said they did not agree that now is the right time for the starting gun to be fired. One person said they thought it was the right time, while the 5th said they did not know about timing, but would vote yes. In another example, BBC Radio Scotland drive time host John Beattie read out 4 anti-independence tweets in a single segment, with no balance from the other side, despite a suggestion to the contrary. One text finished, "My heart sank again today. Same old arguments and rhetoric coming out. Importantly, nothing new." Beattie went on, "Sally in Edinburgh, though, disagrees. It's so wrong that with launching a second independence referendum, Sturgeon is promising her supporters a land of milk and honey. Totally unprincipled. Civil servants have been busy peddling SNP lies." In a Vox Pop segment on The 9 on Tuesday night, 4 people were asked if they supported independence. 2 said yes, while 2 said they did not. An SNP spokesperson said, "These skewed vox pops are really concerning. BBC Scotland is, perhaps just carelessly, misleading audiences with a false picture of Scottish public opinion with these vox pops. Fact is that the opposite is true. Polling consistently shows support for independence higher now than it was in 2014. It would be helpful if the BBC showed their methodology on how these views are gathered and used. A little bit of transparency from BBC bosses would go a long way." A poll in early May found that 55% of Scots supported a second referendum being held in the near future. In September 2021, polling guru Professor John Curtis said that there tended to be a small majority in support of Indie Ref 2 on a 5-year timescale. The National, June 16. Johnson cannot say why Scotland cannot be independence. Report by Steph Braun. Ian Blackford insisted Scotland is big enough, rich enough and strong enough to become an independent nation at Prime Minister's questions, as Boris Johnson failed to answer why it could not stand on its own 2 feet. The SNP Westminster leader spoke about a paper released on Tuesday by the Scottish Government, which delved into how European nations similar in size to Scotland have thrived in comparison to the UK in areas such as income equality and social mobility. And he insisted the research proved Scotland was being held back by Westminster, and demanded answers from the Prime Minister on why Scotland could not be independent. Johnson's defence included accusing Blackford of trying to create trade barriers within the UK. Blackford said, "Our First Minister started a national conversation on Scotland's right to choose an independent future. When we look at nations like Iceland, Ireland, Norway and Denmark, it is clear our neighbours are outperforming the UK. They deliver greater income equality, lower poverty rates, higher productivity and business investment. The list goes on and on. The evidence is overwhelming. Scotland is being held back by Westminster. All those countries can use the powers of independence to create wealthier, fairer and greener societies. Why not Scotland?" Johnson did not answer the question and argued there were other subjects in the national conversation, including the UK standing strong together in sticking up for Ukraine. He said, "I do not doubt my right honourable friend's talents as a conversationalist, but I think there are other things in the national conversation right now, and they include what we are doing to come through the aftershocks of COVID with the strongest jobs-led recovery of any European economy. I think other subjects are also investment in our whole country and in Scotland and the whole of the UK in the tech sector, and standing strong together on the international stage and sticking up for the Ukrainians." Blackford then highlighted how poorly the UK economy was performing, with a cost of living crisis worse than any other G7 country. He argued Scotland cannot afford to stay trapped in a broken Westminster system, and he added, "The Prime Minister can afford to live in his own little Britain, but people have to live with the reality of a failing Westminster system. A cost of living crisis worse in the UK than any other G7 country, an inflation rate double that of France, the second worst economic growth forecast in the G20 next to only sanctioned Russia, and now the threat of a trade war with our European friends, triggered by a law-breaking Prime Minister. That is not a vision for the future of Scotland. Our nation is big enough, rich enough and strong enough. Isn't it the case Scotland cannot afford to stay trapped in the Westminster system? Stop the world, Scotland wants to get on. Johnson replied, he talks about a trade war, but what could be more foolish than a project that actually envisages trade barriers within the United Kingdom? Report by Steph Braun. The National, June 16. Scottish independence. Legal expert explains the paths to Indy Ref 2. Report by Judith Duffy. The starting gun has been fired on the independence campaign, and a proposed date has been revealed for a second referendum. Now the question is what the path to another vote will be if the UK government continues to insist it will not hand the powers to hold Indy Ref 2. Nicola Sturgeon has suggested the vote will be held with or without a Section 30 order. The transfers of powers on the Constitution from Westminster to Holyrood, which was agreed ahead of the 2014 referendum. The Scottish Government has yet to outline firm details on how exactly this will be done, although the First Minister said work to explore alternatives was well underway, with a significant update coming very soon indeed. Here we examine some of the options and the pitfalls which could lie ahead. Securing a Section 30 order. The simplest way for Indy Ref 2 to take place would be if Boris Johnson agreed to a Section 30 order, but he refused in 2020 and shows no sign of changing his position. Asked what would happen in the event of this continuing to be denied, Constitution Secretary Angus Robertson has said he sees no reason for the UK government to do so. The SNP has in recent years been ramping up the message that the UK government is denying democracy by refusing to agree to another referendum. Dr. Nick McKerrow, senior law lecturer at Glasgow Caledonian University, said that part of the new campaign, which has been launched with an opening scene-setter paper on independence, was to put pressure on Johnson. He added, but that is a political campaign because there is no legal pressure to force him to do a Section 30. What you cannot do is make a government do it legally. There is no procedure in court that would force a Section 30 order. It is up to the government to give it. Pushing ahead without a Section 30. The Scottish Government has formally requested a Section 30 order twice since the referendum of 2014, which was rejected by Theresa May in 2017 and again by Boris Johnson 2 years later. McKerrow said it was interesting there now seemed to be a non-position on whether another request would be put in. He said, the reason that is significant is that if you write another Section 30 invitation and say, please give us one, and the answer is no, that has been the legal position so far, it then looks like the only route you think a referendum can come from. But if they don't do that, it seems to me that must be what their other thinking is. They proceed without formally asking. The Scottish Government published a draft independence referendum bill in March 2021, which intends to make provisions for holding a vote on leaving the UK. It has yet to be introduced to the Scottish Parliament. McCarroll said one potential stumbling block is that it will have to have the legal approval of Scotland's Lord Advocate, Dorothy Bain QC. And he said that might be a factor in why the bill has not been put through Parliament yet. Without that, it couldn't be presented. Perhaps they are negotiating with the Lord Advocate to say, if we don't have a Section 30 order, what can we do to get the bill through? This idea of saying we are not going for the Section 30 route is part of the process of maybe coming up with a form of words or a type of bill that the Lord Advocate would sign off and allow it to be debated in Parliament first of all. ALAPA General Secretary Chris McKellenny, who long called for a Plan B route to a referendum, has urged the SNP to reveal its strategy to an independence convention of politicians to rally the movement behind it. Legal challenges. If the Lord Advocate does support the bill, the Scottish Parliament could rapidly introduce it, and with a majority of pro-independence MSPs, it would be expected to pass without difficulty. But that is expected to provoke legal battles with predictions it will end up in the Supreme Court. Debate has been raging over whether a referendum run by Holyrood without Westminster's permission could be ruled legal by the UK's top judges. A legal challenge could come from the UK government, but McCarroll said another possibility would be an individual or group taking action, such as the court bids to oppose named person legislation and to introduce minimum pricing for alcohol. He said, one route is UK government sits on its hands and doesn't challenge it. It gets passed by the Scottish Parliament, and then a campaign group saying no to a referendum is launched and challenges it in the Scottish courts. That could go all the way to the Supreme Court. But he said there was also a question of whether the issue ending up in the courts would add to the momentum for independence. That is a political gamble. How big is the support for having a referendum? He said. A wildcat referendum. The launch of a fresh independence campaign has prompted the Tories to brand it a push for a wildcat referendum. Launching the first of the papers on independence, Sturgeon said she will set out a lawful way forward without a Section 30 order if required. McCarroll said the idea being put forward by opposition politicians of a wildcat referendum was a fairly bogus argument, as it was unclear what it would mean in a Scottish context. He said, they often compare Catalonia and the referendum there, where it was explicitly illegal, because the Constitution says you cannot have a referendum on independence in Spain. The Catalan government organised that in open defiance of the Spanish Constitution. That was a wildcat referendum. There was no legal nuance there. McCarroll said, in a Scottish context, it would likely mean one held even if the Supreme Court rules it is not within the powers of the Scottish Parliament. But he said this would bring issues of how the Scottish Government would fund and organise it if it does not have legal authority. And he said, are you talking about random activists setting up votes? I don't think the SNP or Greens would ever envisage that, as it doesn't have much authority behind it. I think the wildcat referendum is a bit of a red herring, as it is difficult to see, given the legal structures of devolution, how it could even be organised. Report by Judith Duffy. The National, June 16. Dominic Raab says European Court of Human Rights rulings could be ignored. Report by Angus Cochrane. The UK government has a plan to effectively ignore future rulings from the European Court of Human Rights, the Deputy Prime Minister has claimed. Dominic Raab made the astonishing claim after European judges granted an injunction that effectively grounded a flight sending asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda. The Tory minister, who also serves as Justice Secretary, branded that decision wrong and hinted at plans to circumvent future rulings. He said, "I do not think that either in this case or in general it is right for the Strasbourg court to assume a power of injunction and then apply it. The court granted last-minute interim measures covering 3 people who had been due to be on the first flight to Rwanda on Tuesday night. The row has led to calls from some Tory MPs to pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, the document interpreted by the court in Strasbourg, something which Number 10 and Attorney General Suella Braverman have not ruled out." The Justice Secretary said the UK would stay within the Convention, but new laws could ensure that interim measures from the Strasbourg Court could effectively be ignored by the government. The government plans to replace the Human Rights Act, which enshrines the ECHR in domestic law, with a new Bill of Rights. Raab told Times Radio, "In relation to the latest intervention from Strasbourg, so-called Rule 39 interim orders, which are not grounded in the European Convention, they are based on the rules and procedure, internal rules of the court. I certainly believe they should not have a legally binding effect under UK law." Raab, the Deputy Prime Minister, claimed the decision strengthened the case for reform of human rights laws. Asked if the UK could simply ignore the European Court's ruling, Raab said, "Not under the Human Rights Act, but we will address this squarely with the Bill of Rights." He told BBC Radio 4's Today, "We are going to stay within the Convention, but make sure the procedural framework is reformed." The government will curtail the ability of foreign offenders to claim a right to family life as a reason for being refused deportation, and we will stop and change the ability of the Strasbourg Court to issue what amounts to effective injunction when they have no power, grounded in the European Convention, to do so. The flight to Rwanda was grounded following a series of legal challenges in the High Court, Court of Appeal, Supreme Court, and European Court of Human Rights on behalf of the asylum seekers due to be sent on the one-way trip to Africa. The court battles mean there is uncertainty over when any further attempts to fly asylum seekers to the African country will be made, although Home Secretary Priti Patel said the government will not be deterred from doing the right thing. We will not be put off by the inevitable last-minute legal challenges. Following widespread outrage and legal interventions, Raab defended the Rwanda scheme as a sensible, proportionate plan. Asked whether he would be prepared to stake his professional reputation on saying that at least 1 migrant will be taken to Rwanda by the end of the year, Raab told LBC, "Well, I don't quite know what the courts are going to decide on the main hearing. What I can tell you is that I am very confident that we set out a sensible, proportionate plan, which, far from eroding human rights, will protect human rights, because it will help stem this trade in migrants, this trade in human misery. Report by Angus Cochrane. The National, June 16. Scottish refugees have their say on Priti Patel's inhumane Rwanda policy. Report by Hamish Morrison. Refugees living in Scotland have said the Tory government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda are cruel and would not put them off making the journey to the UK despite its intentions. Asylum rights campaigners remain on high alert despite the first scheduled flight being blocked on Tuesday night. Home Secretary Priti Patel said she was prepared to fight activists in the courts to push through the policy, which the Tories insist will break the business model of criminal human trafficking and smuggling gangs. But those who have experienced the UK's asylum process firsthand say the policy will not prevent people from entering the UK. Savan Kadir, aged 29, fled Iraq in 2015 and arrived in Britain in the back of a lorry before claiming asylum. Kadir, who now works as a journalist and a project manager for Refugees for Justice, said, "The whole point of this policy is not to have any impact on people smuggling. It is instead terrorizing asylum seekers and vulnerable people. The Rwanda policy is inhumane, it is cruel, and it's actually state trafficking in some sense. Traffickers have disregard for humanity, for human rights. They are gangs. They don't care what Priti Patel would do to people they forcefully send to another country. People smugglers do not care." Kadir, who now lives in Kilmarnock with his wife and son, argued the key reasons people came to the UK were because of the widespread use of English in the Middle East and Africa, both as a first and second language, and family ties. People in countries fleeing oppression and life-threatening situations in foreign countries were also unlikely to have an accurate, up-to-date knowledge of the working of British politics, meaning they may not even be aware of the political situation in the UK. Said Kadir, "People don't know what is going on in the UK domestically. They don't have Parliament live in Iraq. When you leave and you're with smugglers, you don't have devices, and the smuggler doesn't give you a menu to compare the domestic policy of this country for you to choose." While those who did hear of the policy might be made sceptical of travelling to Rwanda, Kadir said that many of the people who come to the UK have no other options. Your options and your decision make little difference. When your life is in danger, your option is always to leave, because whatever the consequences of that, they will be less than dying. Around 150 people were rescued from the Channel attempting to reach Dover on Wednesday, and the total numbers are such that sending to Rwanda all those who attempt the crossing is not possible, Kadir argued. A woman who fled from Nigeria 2 years ago, arriving in Britain just before the first lockdown, said she was optimistic the policy would eventually fail, but feared for her safety. The woman, who wished to remain anonymous, told how she was forced to flee her home in northern Nigeria, a region plagued by the terrorist group Boko Haram. A Christian and a university-educated woman, she feared she may be captured by jihadists and forcibly married to a member of the group. While she arrived in the UK on a rare legal route, she had a tourist visa for a conference which had not yet expired. She has still faced difficulty in having her claim processed. She said Home Office officials accused her of attempting to exploit the turmoil in her home country to gain access to Britain. She said, right from when the policy was announced, a lot of people have come. So that is to tell you that it is not the issue of smugglers. These people are coming and running from something. They are looking for a way to hide. They are looking for protection. The woman, who now has 2 offers to study nursing at 2 Scottish universities, said the policy was the worst mistake the UK government had ever made. Usman Aslam, a specialist asylum lawyer with the firm Mukhtar and Company, cast doubt on whether the policy would ever be enforced, but said concerned clients had been phoning him constantly. He said, from a legal perspective, it is difficult to see how it could possibly work. If any of my clients receive further threats, I will be immediately quoting their own policy, the objective evidence available, and take the matter to the highest court in Scotland. He pointed out Rwanda already suffered delays in processing asylum claims, and that the government's own report on the country noted that human rights abuses and attacks on LGBT people were rife. Aslam added, it identifies that LGBT communities live in fear and same-sex relationships are taboo in Rwanda, and they want to send human beings there. Pinar Aksu, the human rights and advocacy of the Maryhill Integration Network, which has been supporting the woman and others, said, the Nationality and Borders Act is a direct violation of human rights and international protection. We strongly oppose the Act and the proposal of offshore detention in Rwanda. We need to welcome people in our communities, have a dignified, fair and just immigration system based on human rights. Opponents of the policy point to the example of Australia, which sent migrants to Papua New Guinea until last year, amid concerns of high levels of suicide and self-harm among those detained abroad. Report by Hamish Morrison.
Recorded from the National on the 16th of June 2022. From the Culture section, recorded by Amy. Ultra-rare Rolex sold at auction for £155,000 by Gregor Young. An ultra-rare Rolex, which has been sitting in its owner's drawer for decades, has sold for £155,000 at auction. The government-issued Rolex 5513-5517 military submariner dive watch had an estimated value of around £80,000 to £120,000. Starting at £60,000 bid, the watch sold for well over its expected price in about 2 minutes at the online Bonhams auction on Wednesday. A Perthshire resident who wishes to remain anonymous took the rare item to Crieff-based antique dealer Nick Brewster, who said there was something special about it. Speaking after the auction, Brewster of Nick Brewster Art and Antique said, the hammer price of £155,000 plus commission was above what we'd hoped for, and both myself and my client are overjoyed with the result. It was a pleasure to be able to bring the watch to market and for it to achieve such a high price. He previously described the items as one of the rarest and one of the most collectible watches today. Known as a meal sub, the watch was issued to a former Royal Navy diver in the 1970s by the Ministry of Defence and was bought from him by the second owner in the 1980s. Now, some 40 years later, it is with its third owner. That article was by Gregor Young. Recorded from the National on the 16th of June 2022. From the Culture section, recorded by Amy. Piping Live event returned to Glasgow in August by Adam Robertson. The Piping Live Big Band is set to return to Glasgow for its 5th showcase, as pipers of all ages and abilities are invited to take part. On Monday, August 8th, 150 pipers will gather to walk the streets of Glasgow and perform a repertoire of tunes that everyone will know. This will be the first big band event since 2019 after COVID-19 restrictions halted in both 2020 and 2021. Director of Piping at the National Piping Centre, Finlay MacDonald said, "The Piping Live Big Band is such a moment for me at each year's festival. I have really missed it these last 2 years, as I love seeing all the age ranges and abilities come together to perform and collaborate. As a player and a teacher, events such as this bring everyone together because of their love of piping are heartwarming." McDonald's will be leading the band, which will set off from Blythewood Square at 12 noon and make its way to George Square via West George Street. Since its beginnings in 2016, the event has worked in partnership with a chosen charity, which this year is Beats and Cancer Charity. Everyone who registers to be a part of the band will make a donation, with the majority of the entry fee being donated. Beats and Cancer Charity's Charlene Lowe said, "We are so grateful for the fantastic support we've received from the National Piping Centre. It always inspires us when our supporters come up with new fundraising ideas that haven't been done before. And that's why we're particularly excited about working with the National Piping Centre on this event. We can't wait to watch a sea of yellow marching in August, and we hope everyone gets behind the organisation to support them." Annually, the festival typically attracts over 30,000 attendees, and the lineup this year includes world-class performers. More information about and tickets for all the events at Piping Live 2022 can be found here. That article was by Adam Robertson.
And that was this week's The National Podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes with the publisher's kind permission. Thanks for listening.